to go. Today's daf is Nun Beis. So we are up to, we're actually stickle in the middle of something. So I'm thinking if we should probably go back a little bit in an Aleph on the base. Very short little of it. So the Gemara is darshaning the psukim that it says by three sugiyas, by Par Koid Mashiach and by a seer of a Nossi, I believe, and what was the third place that the Gemara is darshaning it says as follows: Par Mashiach, Par Helam, and Seer Nossi. And the Gemara was trying to know what the extra words of El Yisoid Mizbeach Ha'olam. So the Gemara says, Amar Mar. So this is really at the bottom of Nun Aleph Amar Aleph. El Yisoid Mizbeach Ha'olam, V'lo Yisoid Mizbeach HaPnimi. And not the Yisoid Mizbeach HaPnimi, which is the El Yisoid Mizbeach Ha'olam that says by the Parel Nover Shel Tzibor, is to tell you that which Mizbeach should it be, should the Shirayim be poured on? It should be poured on the Mizbeach. It should be poured on the Mizbeach Ha'olah, and not the Mizbeach HaPnimi. So, Freit the Gemara, Hami Boyele Legufei. Don't we need a pasuk just to say that you have to pour the Shirayim? Zok the Gemara, that I would know from Asher Pesach Oil Moed Nafka. And Rashi tells us over here, Asher Pesach Oil Moed Nafka, Dahainu Chitzon. We know that the dam has the Shirayim of the dam has to be poured on the Mizbeach Chitzon, because this is Asher Pesach Oil Moed. The Havim Motzal Michtav Lugufei, all it had to write was El Yisoid Mizbeach Asher Pesach Oil Moed, and I would have known that there's a mitzvah of Shvicha Shirayim. Why did it have to stick in Al Yisoid Mizbeach HaOila? Mizbeach HaOila lomeli. So that's lemuta that you cannot pour it on the Yisoid Mizbeach HaPnim. Zog to Gemara. Masher Pesach Al Moed Naf. Al Yisoid Mizbeach HaOila. Now we have the next Al Yisoid Mizbeach HaOila, which the Gemara is skipping the one by Param Dover Shel Tzibur, where we learn from there that there is no Yisoid at all on the Mizbeach HaPnimi. There's only a Yisoid on the Mizbeach HaOila. And the third one is to tell you, a Yisoid Mizbeach HaOila by Anasi, it's coming to tell you that any carbon that you're makriv on the Mizbeach HaChitzon, that you spritz the dam on the Mizbeach HaChitzon, it also requires Yisoid. It also requires Shvicha Shirayim on the Yisoid. So Yisoid Mizbeach HaOila, 10 Yisoid L'Mizbeach HaOila, and that we said was the limit of any carbon that you spritz the dam on the Mizbeach outside, on the Mizbeach HaOila, you also have to pour its Shirayim on the Yisoid. Zog to Gemara, the Solka Daitach Kediksiv, if you're telling me, if you're going to want to make the argument that it's just to tell you the Gufa Halacha, that it's to tell you that you, the Seer Nasi itself, you spritz the blood by Yisoid. Hani Lomali, again, it's Iger Chaser ben Asefer here. Hani Lomali, why do you need the words of El Yisoid Mizbeach HaOila? So the Gemara, Kra, Hani Lomali Kra, L'Shirayim, and if you're going to tell me that the extra pasuk is just tell you, Shirayim, that you have to spritz the Shiori Oila on the Yisoid, but you don't need any other carbon. Shirayim Habroi Avidlahu. I don't understand. The Seer Nasi, which anyway, the dam is not spritzed on the Mizbeach HaPnimi. The dam is spritzed on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. So why would I need a special pasuk to tell me that you pour the Shirayim on the Mizbeach HaChitzon? That's where the main Zrika is. So it would be logical to say that if the main Zrika is on the Mizbeach HaChitzon, that's where you would dispose of the Shirayim. So why do I need a pasuk to tell me that I pour the extra dam from the Sir Nasi on the side. I would know it on the side of the Mizbech HaChita, and I would know it because that would be mistaber. So therefore, it's extra, and I have it to tell me that all karbonis you have to pour on the Yesod. Zakt Gemara b'chitema the apach mepach. Maybe the logic is fakir. The karbonis of which you spritz the dam on the mizbech hapnimi, those are the ones that need some representation on the mizbech hachita. So you pour the shirayim on the mizbech hachita. But if the zerika was on the mizbech hachita, like the Sir Nasi, maybe it also requires some representation on the mizbech hapnimi, and you have to pour the shirayim on the mizbech hapnimi. You would think that the Torah wants you to switch around. The baroi legavoy, those karbanos like the Sir Nasi, where the dam is spritzed on the mizbech hachitzayim, the shirayim should be poured on the mizbech hapnimi. Udegavoy lebaroi, and those karbanos like the pile of tzibor, the parkoy Mashiach, where there's rikas on the mizbech hapnimi, so they need their shirayim poured out on the Mizbech HaChitzon. Zok Gemara, but that wouldn't be an option because we already learned from the second incident of Yosy Mizbech HaOlah, which is by Par Helam Dovah Chibor, we already learned that Ha'ein lo Yisoid Lepnimi Atmoy. There is no Yisoid. So you can't have a Havmin to say that the Yisoid Mizbech HaOlah that it says by Sir Nasi is to tell you that you pour the dam, the shir dam on the mizbeach chitzoni, and not on the mizbeach pnimi, because I would know it anyway, because there is no yisoid on the mizbeach pnimi. So the only place where you would be able to pour shiraim of dam, the only yisoid available is only on the mizbeach chitzoni. So again, I can ask, why does it say yisoid mizbeach ha'olah by the Sir Nasi? Elamai is to tell you that all karbonis that are brought on the Mizbech HaChitzah and their shirayim also requires to be spilled on the side of the Mizbech HaChitzah. Zakta Gemara, maybe it means something else. Maybe all the pasuk is telling you by a Sir Nasi, is that you have to all it's telling me is that Mizbeach Shalola Yeheli Yesod, which means that the Zrika has to be where there's a Yesod. Meaning, there's no Yesod on the southeast corner. On the southwest corner of the Mizbeach, there is no Yesod. There's no Yesod on the southwest corner of the Mizbeach HaChitzon. And maybe it's telling you that when you spritz the dam, you should only spritz it on a Karen, on a corner of the Mizbeach that has a Yesod. I'm sorry? Say that again.
Saying that we don't need the pasuk because we know it's.
We don't need a pasuk by the Sir Nasi.
It's logical to say because
it's logical to say that it should be spritzed on the out. The Yesod should be on the outside.
Why do you still need the pasuk?
No, the fact that it needs shvicha shiraim liyasod, that the pasuk has to mention. You don't automatically say that a carbon needs shvicha shiraim liyasod. So the question is, it could have said Yisod Mizbeach. Why did it tell Yisod Mizbeach Ha'olah? So the question, why is it specifying which Mizbeach is Rikaz on? It has to tell us. You need a limud to tell you that you need shvicha shiraim liyasod. The question is, why did the Torah have to get so specific when it was telling you where the shvicha shiraim should be? But to say that all karbonos also need shvicha shiraim, that you would need a limit for. which is what we're trying to use the El Yisod Mizbeach Ha'olah, but it's Nasi. We're trying to use it to tell you other things. But the Gemara is going to ask, you don't necessarily have it for other things. Maybe you need to tell you where you need to spritz the dam from the Sir Nasi. So Zok to Gemara. One second. So I'm making a little bit of a mistake over here, because the chatos you spritz on all 4 chronos. So what does it mean? Oh, because I tell you that the oila. See, that's what the oila has shtayim shein arba. The carbon oila you spritz on 2 opposite corners, which each corner represents like 2 walls, right? Because you're putting it right on the corner. So maybe when it says El Yisod Mizbeach Oila, it's not telling you that all karbonos need shvicha shiraim liyisod. Maybe it's telling you that the carbon oil, which only has 2 matanos, the chatas that has 4 matanos, you have to put it on each carrot. But the carbon oil, you only spritz it on 2 corners, 2 opposite corners. So which opposite corner should you pick? You should pick 2 opposite corners that have a yisod under it. So if I'm not mistaken, there on the southeast corner, there is no yisod. So therefore, the 2 opposite corners that you should use will be the southwest corner and the northeast corner. So maybe that's what the pasuk is telling us when it says "El Yisod Mizbeach Ha'olah." When it says that, but a Sir Nasi, but a Sir Chadash Nasi, maybe it's only telling you a halacha as to where this rika has to occur by the carbon oil. Zog to Gemara, Miksiv El Yisod Ha'olah. If it said El Yisod Ha'olah, I would agree with you that that's what it's teaching you. But it said El Yisod Mizbeach Ha'olah. It says El Yisod Mizbach Ha'olah is what it says. And that's another yitur, because it speaks out the word Mizbach Ha'olah. So why do you need Mizbach Ha'olah? It must be to tell you that all karbanis that are on the Mizbeach have to, all karbanis that are shrik on the Mizbeach, you need shvicha shirayim l'yisai. Zok Gemara, maybe the pasuk is still only coming to tell you halacha on the zrika of the carbon oila, that you need to be connected hayisod. You need to be on either on the southwest corner and the northeast corner, because iav ksiv el yisod oila. If it just said yisod oila and not yisod mizbach oila, havamina, I would have thought that where do you spritz the dam of the carbon oila? Bizkifa yisod, meaning on the vertical section of the yisod. So the vertical section of the yisod is the bottom amma of the mizbeach, because the yisod is then amma up and then the amma horizontal, then the amma in. So you would have thought that the makam ashrika would be right at the bottom on the wall of the yisod. Hashda tichsiv al yisod mizbach oila. That means agagoy the yisod, because from mizbach oila you learn, just like the mizbeach, you spritz on top of it on its surface, so too when you're spritzing on the yisod, it's on its surface, which would be like on the tread of that base. And Tosfos tells us it doesn't literally mean on the tread; it just means to tell you that it's above that one amma. It's on that tread and also on the vertical part of the mizbeach, continuing that. Rabbi Shmuel, Gag Yisod Lama Likra. Once again, I don't need a pasuk to tell me that it has to be above that bottom one amma. I would know it from a kal v'chomer. Uma shiyore chatos, madich shirayim from a carbon chatos. She'enim mechaperes. The shirayim of the dam of the carbon chatos are not mechaper, because the zrika sadam was mechaper. The kapara has already occurred by the point that we're up to the shirayim. Nevertheless, to una gag, the shirayim of the chatos have to be poured on the gag of the mizbeach. How do I know that the shirayim of the chatos have to be placed on the gag? Because it says, it's because by the shirayim of the chatos, it says as follows. second. It says El Yisoid HaMizbeach, and it's Mashma El HaYisoid Shehu K'Mizbeach. It has to be placed on the Yisoid. What part of the Yisoid? The part of the Yisoid that's like the Mizbeach, meaning it's a horizontal surface. So Madich the Shiraim of the Chatas, which we already know can't be on that bottom vertical Amo. Tchilas Oila, the Zerikas of the Oila, Shemichaperes, those are the integral Zerikas. That's what makes the carbon Venus Ratza. Einaydin Chetauna Gag Yisoid. Surely the Zerikas Adam for the carbon Oila should be at least within the area that's restricted to the area of the Shiraim of the Chatas. So the Zerika of the Oila logically shouldn't be less than the Shiraim of the Chatas. And therefore, I would know it anyway. I don't need a pasuk to tell you that the Zerikas Adam of the Oila has to be higher. So I have now an extra El Yisoid Mizbeach, so I can apply it to all other karbonis require Shvicha Shiraim on the Yisoid. Rabbi Kiva had a different argument to say the same thing, that you shouldn't need a special pasuk to tell us that the Zerikas Adam of the carbon oila can't be on the bottom am. And he learned as follows: so he sticks in these extra words. The shiyorei chatas are not mechaper, and they're not boim lechaper. Tu'una gag yisoid. It has to be above the bottom amma of the mizbeach. Chilas oila, the zerika of the carbon oila, shemichaperes, that is the main kapara of the carbon. Ubal lechaper, again this extra word of ubal lechaper, einay din shetu'una gag yisoid. Surely the zerika sadam of the carbon oila should be above that bottom amma. So to Firois, imkein ma tamad loimer al yisoid mizbach oila. Now al yisoid mizbach oila is extra again, because I don't need it to tell us the positioning of the zrika of the carbon oila. So we learned it's telling you 10 yisoid lemizbeach shel oila. Any carbon that you make zrika sadam on the mizbeach oila, the shirayim have to be spilled on the yisoid of the mizbeach. Frank Gemara, my beinai, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel both bring a kal v'chomer to prove that the Zrikas Adam of the carbon oila cannot be on the bottom amma, just like the Shricha Shiraim of the Chatas. But Rabbi Kiva used a little bit of a different lotion. He stuck in the Ein Boin Lechaper by the Shiare Dam of the Chatos, and by the Dam of the Oila, he used a lotion Shemechaperes Ubal Lechaper. So what's the difference between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva? Rabbi Kiva has these extra words. Amar of Ada Bar Ava, Shirayim ma'akvini kibinayu mar sovar ma'akvi. Rabbi Shmuel holds their ma'akiv umar sovar loy ma'akvi. Let's see who holds what. Zok Rashi, Shirayim ma'akvin ikibinayu. Rabbi Shmuel sovar kapara hu deloy ma'akvi. Eina chanami. The Shirayim are not part of the kapara, but a carbon chatos. The Shirayim are not part of the kapara, but avalikuba ma'akvi they're still required. If you don't do that, there will be ma'akv the carbon. Now that doesn't mean that creates the kapara, but it still is a mandatory step in the avoida of the chatas. Rabbi Kiva, the Moshe, Rabbi Kiva stuck in the extra words. Ve'ein boin l'chapara, when he's talking about the shiyarei dam of the chatas, ashminon, by sticking in those extra words, he's telling us the ein matan domim shall matanois tali behen. They have no impact whatsoever on the matan damim of the carbon chatas. The shirayim have no impact on the matan damim. The loy ma'akfilu shirayim lazois. It's not going to be ma'akif. Now, the simplest and most pashut pshat to learn in this machlokes is, if you didn't do the shvicha shirayim, will the carbon be kosher or not? It's a ma'akif. But there are those who have a different pshat in this discussion of what shirayim ma'akif mean. There are those who learn that the machlokes isn't if the carbon is going to be possible without it, avada the carbon will be kosher with it. The question is, l'chila, you're supposed to make sure to leave over. Could you just pour all the dam when you're doing this rika and not have any shrine? The machlokes is, are you supposed to purposely create shirayim so that you could pour the shirayim on the side? So there's more than one pshat in shirayim makvin, but whatever the case is, we don't need the pasuk of Yosy Mizbach Ha'olah to tell us the positioning of where you spritz the dam of an oila, because we know that from the kal v'chomer here that it has to be above the bottom amma. So therefore, we have an extra pasuk to teach us that all karbonos that is rikas adam are on the mizbech achitzain, the shiyari dam are poured down to the side. The belt. Rav Papa wants to argue on how we understood this machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. Rav Papa Amar dechula alma shiraim ein mak. Sai Rabbi Yishmael and Sai Rabbi Akiva hold shiraim ein mak. So what exactly does Rabbi Akiva say differently than Rabbi Shmuel? Zog to Gemara v'hacha b'mitzui chatas ha'oif ma'akav kamim. The halach is by a chatas ha'oif, they were never mekabel the dam in a keli. They would just spritz directly from the neck of the bird onto the mizbeach. And then after they finished spritzing, then what the kohen would do is he would squeeze the body of the bird, squeeze out any extra blood onto the mizbeach, onto the side of the mizbeach. So the question is, that extra step of squeezing out the dam, that's like parallel to the shvich hashirayim, the yisoid. That question is ma'akev dafka by the chatasai. Mar savar ma'akev, which will be Rabbi Shmuel, umar savar loy ma'akev, which will be Rabbi Akiva. But at the end of the day, you still have a kal v'chomer from the chatos, but we're talking about the chatas oif to the oil. So everybody else shirayim is not ma'akev.
Right. You're referring to pouring it in the right place or having shirayim at all?
Pouring any shirayim will yisod. No, not necessarily. If you don't have to spritz it on the yisod, you don't have to have it. Zok to Gemara Tanya Kavasei Papa. We're going to support our Papa. Specifically, Rashi says the Islele Rabbi Shmuel Nami Loy Ma'akvi Shirayim. Rav Papa was the one who said that not only does Rabbi Akiva hold the shirayim are not ma'akiv, but Rabbi Shmuel as well holds that the shirayim is not ma'akiv. We cannot bring a brayta to support that. It says this called dam hapor yishafech. That's by the par koyim at Mashiach, I believe. Here it's the bays. V'nosan hakoyim min adam al karnes mizbach ketoris hasamim lefnei Hashem asher ba'oil moyed. And then it is kol dam hapor yishboich el yisoid mizbeach ha'oila asher pesach ha'el moyed. That's by the par koyin HaMashiach. Frag the Gemara, ma tamad leimer hapar. It could have said this kol domai. We know what we're talking about. Why did it speak out the word hapar? Zog to Gemara, lima, it teaches us al par yoim hakipurim. So even though these words that we've just quoted are in the sugya, in the parsha of the par koyin Mashiach, the word hapar tells us that this is also referring to the par of yoim hakipurim. Shetoin matan damim liyasoid. The par yoim hakipurim also needs sheficha shiyore hadam to the yisoid. Therefore, Rabbi, that is the shita of Rabbi. Rabbi Shmuel said, and Rashi makes it very clear that Rabbi Shmuel is not arguing on this halacha of Rabbi. Rashi says, loy lach loy kuba. Rabbi Shmuel is not coming to argue on what Rabbi said. He's just telling us a kavachaymer how we know that shiraim are not ma'akiv. So avada, even by the par yom kippurim, you're supposed to pour the dam on the yisoid, but it's not ma'akiv. V'hachik Omar, par yom kippurim mikavachaymer huba. The par yom kippurim, I don't need the pasuk of hapar to tell me that the par yom kippurim also needs shvicha shiraim liyisoid, because mikavachaymer huba. I could have learned it from a kal v'chomer. Nevertheless, the kosvei akosov, you still have the hapar. So you have a kal v'chomer where it would have known anyway that the par yom kippurim requires shvichas dam liyasoid, and the pasuk doubles down and tells us that with the word v'apar. Why twice? Yochel la'akoiv kosvulach Normally, by kachim, if the Torah repeats something, that's ma'akiv. So you would think that there's a shtickle of repetition by the par Yom Kippurim because they have a kavul chaimer. Plus, the Torah tells it to us in the lashon of a par. Talmud Loimar v'chilu mechaper. We have a pasuk to tell us that it will not be machap, that it will not be ma'akiv. So let's see the Gemara inside. Amar Rabbi Shmuel, kavul chaimer. I have a kavul chaimer that the par Yom Kippurim requires shvichas dam liyasai. Uma emi she'ein nichnas damay lefnim chayva. Ton yisoid madach the par koyin Mashiach, where it's not a chayva to bring the par koyin Mashiach. You only bring it if koyin Mashiach did an avera. So in the event that happens, so then you have to do it. So it's a mitzvah to do in the event that the koyin Mashiach should do an avera. But there's no mitzvah chayuvas like yours on Yom Kippur to bring this par no matter what. So madach mishayin nichnas damay lefnim chayva. Madach the par koyin Mashiach, where there's no chiyuv to bring a par koyin Mashiach. It's just a mitzvah to be brought if it becomes necessary. Nevertheless, Tan Yisoid, the par koyin Mashiach, it's Shirayim, needs to be poured on the Yisoid of the Mizbech HaChiton. Misha nichnas damay lefnim chayva. The par Yom Kippurim, where it's prescribed every Yom Kippur, whether there's an avera done or not, this carbon must be brought. That's more chomer. Ein aydin sheton Yisoid, surely it should require matan damim liyasai. So we sort of have a redundancy. We have a kavul chaimer, plus we have the par telling us that there's a requirement of shvichas dam liyasai for the par Yom Kippur. Rabbi Kiva had a different kavul chaimer. Uma mi she'ein damay nichnas lefnai v'lefnim bein lechayve bein lemitzvah ton Yisoid madich the par koyin Mashiach, which you never spritz the blood in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. There's no chayv, there's no mitzvah. It's not supposed to at all be spritzed in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. Misha nichnas domay chayva lefnaya lefnim. The par Yom Kippurim, where there's a chiyuv, the chetchila every year to spritz its dam lefnai v'lefnim in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, ein aydin sheton Yisoid. Surely it should require shvichas shirayim liyisoid. So Sai Rabbi Kiva and Sai Rabbi Shmuel are illustrating that I would have known through a kavul chaimer that the par Yom Kippurim requires shvichas dam liyasai. Yet the Torah says hapar to include it as well. So therefore, yochel yakvenu. I would think that since we have a double limud to tell us that the par Yom Kippurim requires shvichas shirayim liyasai, maybe it should be ma'akiv. Talmud Loimer, we had this pasuk before, v'chila michaper es hakodesh, which we learn from there. Shalmu kol hakapar skulam divrei Rabbi Yishmael. And it says the chila michaper. We learn that once you finish the kaparis, meaning you finish the zurikas hadam, and the kaparis for the carbon has already been done, the shvicha shirayim will no longer be ma'akiv. Now, maybe the chila mechaper es hakodesh means you did the shvicha shirayim as well. It doesn't say what the kapara is. Maybe the kapara includes shvicha shirayim. So Rashi tells us that if you look up the psukim there, the psukim over there list off all of the different avodas that needs to be done with the dam of par Yom Kippurim, but there's no mention in that parsha of shvicha shirayim. So the Chil Mechaper says if you do all the avodas that we just talked about, you're done. So the fact that the Torah says you're done if you do the avodas that we're talking about clearly indicate that the shvicha shirayim are not ma'akiv the Torah. Gewaltig. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. And therefore, madach, the shvicha shirayim of the parasha Yom Kippurim, which the dam needs to be brought into the lefnai v'lefnim, or it's a chayva. Once a year, it's got to be brought, even in the heichal. Kavachomer lepar koyin Mashiach. Kavachomer par koyin Mashiach. Its shvicha shirayim liyisoid will not be marked. Zog to Gemara. What about misir nasi? Why don't you have a raya from the parka Mashiach from Sir Nasi? Mayata as follows: Uma mi she'ein nichnas damei lefnim. Madach tesir nasi, whose carbon, the blood doesn't come into the hechal at all. The chatos hanasi which was the third chatas, right? It says first par koy Mashiach, then par el mdover shel tzibur, and then par nasi. The par of the nasi, the dam is not spritzt at all in the heichal. It's only spritzt just like a regular carbon chatas of a regular person. It's spritzt on the karnes and mizbeach ha'oila. So umami shei nichnas dami lefnim, loy chayv v'loy mitzvah. Ma dichte sir nasi, which even the chetchila never has a halacha to spritz its dam in the heichal. Ton yisoid, it requires shvichas damim liyisoid, misha nichnas damai lefnim, bein lechayva bein lemitzvah. And there are those who take out the chayva because we just said earlier that there's no mandatory reason to bring the par koy Mashiach. It's only if it's required. Einay din sheton yisoid. Surely it should require shvichas shirayim liyisoid. Yet, even though we could have learned par koy Mashiach from a kalvachomer of the Sir Nasi, the Torah says by farish by the par koy Mashiach that it needs shvichas shirayim liyisoid. So yachol yakvenu, maybe by par koy Mashiach, since there's a double limud side from the kalvachomer and side the pasuk repeats it, it should also be ma'akiv. Talmud loimer veskol dam hapar yishafech. What do we learn from there? It's a very interesting way of expressing what needs to be done. Because when the Torah lists off the avoidance of the par koy Mashiach, it's v'shachat, v'lokach, it starts off with a verb. And then it describes what you need to do. V'lokach has a bar, v'lokach has a dam, v'hiz has a dam. Starts with the verb, and then it gets into what the verb is referring to. But when the Torah refers to shvicha shiram liyasoid, the Torah completely changes the way it says it. And it doesn't say v'yishafech es kol adam. It says es kol adam yishafech. So the Torah is expressing the responsibility, the chiyuv to do shvicha, using a slightly different nusach. So therefore, ves kol dam hapar yishafech noskoy akasev. We skip out the next word. The Shita takes it out. Noskoy akasev va'osoi shiyarei mitzvah. The Torah, by expressing it differently, is teaching us that it's only shiyarei mitzvah. It's not ma'akiv. Loy malach shirayim ein ma'akiv. So therefore, the Balti pasuk by par koy Mashiach expresses the chiyuv of shvichas damim liyasoid differently than all the other avodas that the Torah lists off for the par koy Mashiach. It tells us that it's not ma'akiv. Fact the Gemara, v'savar Rabbi Shmuel mitzui chatas ha'oif ma'akiv. Now, based on this pshat, based on Papa's pshat, we're saying that Rabbi Shmuel holds that the mitzvah chatas ha'oif is ma'akiv. Right? Because that was the difference between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva, where Rabbi Kiva holds not ma'akiv, and Rabbi Shmuel it is ma'akiv. Rabbi Papa said they're not talking about shvicha shabayim liyasoid, they're speaking about mitzvah chatas ha'oif. So that means by mitzvah chatas ha'oif, Rabbi Shmuel is going to hold that it's mandatory. But v'atanya we learned the very Rabbi Shmuel. So this is Rabbi Shmuel, the Bishmedish Rabbi Shmuel says this. What does he say? V'anishar badam, the leftover blood from the chatas ha'oif yimatzei should be squeezed out. And we learn v'anishar yimatzei v'she'enoi nishar lo yimatzei zok Rashi kloimar im yotza kol adam ba'azah ein tarich mitzvah. What if all the dam already came out by the azah? You don't have to make mitzvah. So you see from the Devei Rabbi Shmuel that mitzvah, squeezing out the dam of the bird by the chatas ha'oif, is not mandatory. So how could you tell me, Rav Papa, that Rabbi Shmuel holds it is mandatory? Zok Gemara trei tanoi v'alibit Rabbi Shmuel. Maybe there was a machlokes as to what Rabbi Shmuel's opinion is regarding mitzvah adam. Zok Gemara v'ayter. Amar Rabbi Bacham. Hai tan sovar shirai mak. We've had this discussion. Is shirai ma'akiv? Is it not ma'akiv? And Rav Papa wanted to say Sai Rabbi Shmuel and Sai Rabbi Kiva is not ma'akiv. The Gemara before said that it's machlokes. Zok Rabbi Bachama. This following Tanya that I'm about to quote, hands down, he holds shiur ma'akiv. The Tanya we learned. It says hakoyin hamachate oisa. So it says in the pasuk, daber el harin ve'alban of lemer zois toris achados b'mkoyim asher tishachet ha'oilo tishachet achados, and then it's hakoyin hamachate oisa. The kohen who does the avodah of this carbon, he's the one who's going to get to eat the basar of the carbon chatas. What does that mean? Oisa sheniten doma lamayla. Oisa tells you Dafka, I saw Dafka if the dam was put lamaila v'loy oison shanitin dama lamata. The dam of a korban chatas needs to be spritzed on the top half of the mizbeach. If the korban oil you spritz on the bottom half of the mizbeach. So if you spritz the dam of the chatas in the wrong place, it's possible, and therefore there's no eating that korban. So hakoyim echat oisa, from the oisa we learned davka if the zrikas adam of the korban chatas was done exactly as it's supposed to be done. Shenitin dama lamaila v'loy oison shenitin dama lamat. Zokim or amrit. I don't understand. You're learning out of this words in the pasuk that the dam of the chatas that you spritz lamata will be possible. I mean, look, where are you coming from? I don't look. Whoever said that it's mutter, whoever said that it's kosher, that you in a pasuk could say that it's possible. Like out of the blue, should be telling you Allah about trika. Where are you coming from that you now need a pasuk to tell you that if you spritz the dam lamata, it will be possible? Zaktamar, I'll tell you where we're coming from. Michlal shenemar. It says in the pasuk regarding karbonos, v'dam zevachecha yishafeich al mizbach ha'olam. So let's see the lashon of pasuk. V'sis ha'olam secha habasar v'hadam al mizbach Hashem alekecha v'dam zevachecha yishafeich al mizbach Hashem alekecha v'habasar toy. So it's mashma that even if there's no zrika other than the dam zevachecha yishafeich al mizbach Hashem alekecha, you could still have the habasar toicha. It will still be kosher. So we're coming from a pasuk that seems to be very inclusive, that everything's kosher. It says in the pasuk, it teaches us that whenever you need 4 zrikas dam, if you didn't do 4 zrikas dam on achatas, rather you did 1 big matan of dam, keeper, it will still be a kosher, a carbon. So you might think the same way we're not makbid and having all 4. Even if only 1 matana was given, it would be kosher. Maybe yachalaf hanitin lamayla shenatna lamata keeper. Maybe huadin a carbon chatas whose dam was spritzed in the wrong place, that would also be covered by the vidams of achecha yishafeich, and therefore ba'abasar toichel vidinu. And actually, there's a good argument to make, because nemru domim lamayla. It talks about domim that need to be lamayla, which are the carbon chatas. V'nemru domim lamata, and the Torah talks about dam that needs to be spritzed on the bottom half of the mizbeach, which is for a carbon oila. Ma domim ha'amur lamata. Just like by a carbon oila, where you're supposed to spritz the blood on the lower half of the mizbeach. Shenosnan lamayla. What if you spritz the dam on the top half of the mizbeach? Loy chiper. It would not be mechaper. So therefore, af domim ha'amurim lamala. So to the chatos, if you spritz it in the wrong place, in nosnan lamata, loy keeper, it should not be mechaper. Which means that now I don't need oisa to tell me that it's possible. Maybe I should just learn it from the hakish of the dam lamayla to dam lamata. Zaktamar, you wouldn't say that. Loyim amrit betachtoinim shenitnin benesina lamayla shein soifen lamayla. Just because if you spritz the dam of an oila on the top half, it's possible. You know why it's possible? Because never should the dam of the oila ever go on the top half of the mizbeach. So therefore, it's like keeper. But but that doesn't mean it should be possible if you spritz the blood of the chatos lower than you should have. You know why? Anyway, the carbon chatos has a matnas dam lamata, which is the shvicha shiraim liyasoy. So I understand why if you spritz the carbon oil too high, it will be possible, because an oil has no shaykhs to a zrika on the top of the mizbeach. But the carbon chatos, we know has some exposure, some din of matnas dam on the lower half of the mizbeach, because anyway you pour the shiraim liyaside. So maybe the chatos does have a zone on the lower half of the mizbeach as well. So Taimer bel yoyim shenas lamata sheyesh men karv lamata. Zaktamar, that's not an argument. Just because shvicha shiraim by the chatos is required on the side of the mizbeach, that's no reason why, if you made the zrika also on the lower half, that it should be kosher. You know why? Because damim apnimim yochichu. Let's look at the karbonis chatos, like the par halam nefesh shel tzibur and the par kohen Mashiach, where you spritz their blood on the mizbeach hakataris. Sheyesh mehen kara b'chutz. They also have exposure to the chutz, because the shirayim of the damim of the par kohen Mashiach also gets put on the yesod of mizbeach chitayim. Nevertheless, v'im nostan betchila b'chutz, if the zrika was made b'chutz, lo kiper, it wouldn't be mechaper. So Ibozoi, don't tell me that since the chatas, anyway, the shvicha shirayim is at the lower half, the zrika should be there. You can't make a connection from the shvicha shirayim to the zrika, because if you would, then you would have an argument to say that even by the Pakray Mashiach, you can make the zrika on the mizbech achitza. Zoktamar, that's not a time. Lo yimamrit b'domim hapnimiyim, just because by the dam hapnimiyim there's no connection. Shein mizbeach hapnimi mimarkam. That's because the zrika on the mizbeach hapnimi is not the end of the avodah. There's still more stuff that needs to get done. That's why the zrika on doing the zrika on the outside mizbeach wouldn't be enough. But when you're talking about a regular carbon chatos that's supposed to be spritzed on the outside mizbeach, on the top half, sharei karnois mimarkazoisim. There, once you spritz the dam on the 4 karnos mizbeach, that's all. You're finished all of the work. Now, what other work do you need for those carbonis that you spritz their dam on the mizbeach apnimi? Says the mizbeach is not mimarkad. What's missing? The Gemara is going to get to that in a second. So, nevertheless, im nostan lamata sherim. You might have thought that therefore the dam of the carbon chatas that you spritzed on the lower half of the mizbeach, you might think it would have been kosher because of the discussion that we just had. That's why you need the word to tell us oisa shenitin dama lamaila v'loy shenitin dama lamata. The pasuk needs to tell you that if the dam was spritzed lamata, it will be possible, because logically I wouldn't have known. Period. So that is the bright. Now, Gemara wants to probe. What does it mean? Masha ein mizbeach hapnimi marken. What does it mean that the zrikas adam on the mizbeach hapnimi by the chatoyis hapnimiyos, like the par in the Mashiach, that doesn't complete the carbon? Lav doesn't mean lav sheshirayim ma'akvid. Isn't it telling you that the shirayim are ma'akiv? So this is exactly what Rabbi Bechama says. You see, since the Tana over here refers to the Mizbeach HaPnimi, those carbonis that you need to spritz the dam on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, that's not the only avodah that's needed. We still need more. The Mizbeach HaPnimi doesn't discharge the carbon. You need more. What more could the Tana be referring to? It must be that it's referring to Shvicha Shirayim. So here I have a Tana who holds that the Shvicha Shirayim Lo Yisoida Mizbeach HaChitzon by the Chadas HaPnimi is Ma'akiv. Amalei Rava, Zok Rava, that's not what it means. That's not what it means at all. Because the Hachi Teisi B'Kal V'Chaimer. If that was the case, that there's a Chiv that's Ma'akiv on the Shvicha Shirayim of the Chatois HaPnimius, that it's Ma'akiv that the Shvicha Shirayim Al Yisoid, then you have a Kal V'Chaimer that's going to get you into trouble as follows. Ma Shirayim HaPnimiim, Ma Dichti Shirayim HaPnimiim, Shesoifon Choiva B'Chutz. There's a chiyuv that's ma'akiv to pour the shirayim of these carbonos b'chutz. Nevertheless, asan betchila b'chutz loy kiper. If you made this rika b'chutz for these carbonos, it would not be mechaper, it would be possible. So a regular chatas hanitna l'mayla, whose dam is officially supposed to be spritzed on the top half of the outside mizbeach, she'ein soifan chayva lamata. There's never a chiyuv of the shvich ashirayim liyisoid for a regular carbon chatas. But also betchila lamata, and the chetchila you spritz them lamata, eino din shalai keeper. Surely it wouldn't be mechaper. So then I wouldn't need oisa. So that cannot possibly be what the Tana means when he says that the zrikas adam on the mizbeach hapnimi by the chatois hapnimiyos is einem amarkan. It can't mean that shvicha shirayim liyasoid is ma'akiv, because if it was ma'akiv, then I would have a kavachomer to say that spritzing the blood of the chatas in the wrong place should be possible. I won't need isa. Elo, you know what it means? Ein mizbeach hapnimi markam bilvad. It means because that's not the only zrikas adam that's required for these chatois, because they also need elapareiches. Remember, the chatois apnimius, the zrika that they make is not exclusively on the mizbeach apnimi. There also has to be a zrika done on the pareiches. So the zrika on the mizbeach isn't the only avodah; it's only a partial avodah, and therefore you can't bring a raya. Tanarabban v'chila mikaper. At the end of the avodas of Yom Kippurim, it says v'chila mikaper. After you do all the avodas, you're good to go. Im kiper kala. If you finished all the avodas as listed in the parsha, you're done. V'im loy kiper, and if you didn't, loy kala, you're not done. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, you're really not touching it in order of the pasuk, because according to you, it should have said v'chiper v'chila. If you were mechaper, you're done. If you're not mechaper, you're not done. But it doesn't say that. It says v'chila mechaper. So Zok Rabbi Yehuda, why don't you read the pasuk as it's written? Im kila keeper, im loy keeper. Meaning im kila, if you finished everything, not only the avoiders that are mafurish in the parsha, but all the avoiders that we know apply to the parsha Yom Kippurim, including the shvicha shiraim liyasoy, and therefore shemchitzer achas mikol avatanos le'asav leklum. Even if you merely skipped out shvicha shiraim liyasoy, it's going to passel the carbon. That's how you should read it. My beinayu, what's the difference between the way Rabbi Akiva learned it and the way Rabbi Yehuda learned it? Zok to Gemara, I explained it in a way where there's a very significant difference, where the shvicha shiraim liyasod is ma'akev, but not everybody learns that way. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, there's a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Yeshua ben Levi, how to understand this machlokes of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Akiva. Chad amar mashmos darshnik b'nai. They both agree that shvicha shiraim liyasod is not ma'akev. It's just a question of how to darshan, how to read the pasuk. But no nafkamina lalach. But the Chadamer, Shirai Ma'akvim Ikebeinai. The Machlok is exactly that. Would Shirai be Ma'ak? So Zok Gemara, Tistayim de Rabbi Shua ben Levi, who the Amar Shiraim de Ma'ak. Let's say Rabbi Shua ben Levi, who learns in Rabbi Yehuda that the Shiraim are Ma'ak. Where do you get it from? The Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi once said, L'divrei Omer Shirai Ma'akvin, the Mandam who holds that Shiraim are Ma'akiv, maybe Par Echad. What happens if after all the zrikas were done on the par and you're ready to spritz the shiraim on the side and it spills out? So what do you do? So he says maybe par echad umaskel betchila b'fnim. You got to start the beginning of the zrikas at pnim. Why? Those were done already. The teretz is because you can't have shiraim if you didn't zrika. So normally you would just start from where you left off. But the problem here is that in order for it to be shirayim, there had to be a zrika done with them. So whatever you see here, you see clearly Rabbi Shua ben Levi says that there's a Tana who holds that shirayim are ma'akvin. So let's say that that's Rabbi Yehuda. Zok to Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan also quotes a Tana who holds shirayim ma'akvin. Out Rabbi Yochanan less lehasvara, v'amar Rabbi Yochanan, Tana Rabbi Nechemya kedivrei Omer shirayim ma'akvin. So maybe it's Rabbi Yochanan who's the one who says that Rabbi Yehuda holds shirayim ma'akvin. Ella, what are you going to be forced to say in Rabbi Yochanan? Ella kedivrei Omer v'lav lahani tanoi. Yes, there's a man who holds shirayim ma'akvin. True, but that doesn't mean that it's referencing Rabbi Yehuda. There could be another town that holds shirayim ma'akvin. Hachanami kedivrei Omer v'lav lahani tanoi. So too, you don't have a raya from the fact that Rabbi Shua ben Levi quotes Tanoi and holds shirayim ma'akvin. That doesn't mean that's Rabbi Yehuda. It could be some other town, and therefore you don't have a raya that it's Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, we'll stop here, and tomorrow we're going to start from a new Mishnah again.